Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to outline a build that I feel is a reasonably solid choice for a league starter in 3.15. This is an Exsanguinate Miner, and it's a build that I was playing during the 3.14 Gauntlet event, until that was rudely cut short by a death to a bug. However, this is the tree that I was intending to follow, with a couple of tiny modifications made to make it fit 3.15. And I'll go through all of that, but in the background, I just want to show a whole bunch of gameplay footage, and while I discuss the mechanics of the build. So this is a mine build. What that means is that it's not going to be casting skills itself. Instead, it's going to be throwing mines on the ground. Mines can be thrown at a medium range, and when you tell them to detonate, they will explode, and that will set off the spell once. Additionally, with a couple of mechanics in this build, there is a chance to be able to reuse those mines and get 2 uses out of them instead of just 1. So we're going to be using the skill Exsanguinate, which is one of the physical damage skills that was added in 3.14. Previously, I've played a very similar build that used the skill Glacial Cascade. It's my opinion that Exsanguinate is the same skill but better compared to Glacial Cascade, and so I'm recommending this as a replacement for builds that previously ran Glacial Cascade. That said, you certainly can still play Glacial Cascade, it's still fine. I just feel that Exsanguinate does the same thing and does it slightly better. So, our mana reservations are going to be War Banner for 10%, Herald of Purity unsupported for 25%, and Skitterbots for 35%. So that's a total of 70% of your mana reserved. Then you're also going to fit in Vitality Aura at whatever level is comfortable with the rest of your gear. We're not really going to be using much in the way of mana to cast our skills. That's part of the reason we wanted to go Exsanguinate. Exsanguinate has a base life cost. And what this means with mines is that instead of reserving mana like you typically would for a mine now, you reserve life instead. And that amount of life is not meaningless, but it's also not devastatingly high. My estimates are that even with a 6 link, you're looking at 113 with the most expensive links, or 91 with less expensive links, as the amount of amount of life reserve per mine. I could be out by a couple of points there, but that's approximately the sorts of numbers we're talking about. So, with the links that we're going to be using, our primary links, we're going to have Exsanguinate linked to High Impact Mines, linked to Trap and Mine support, linked to Brutality, linked to Chain support, and linked to Swift Assembly support. It's going to be quite difficult to support a 6 link early on this build, and also just to source one at league start. So you can reduce the number of supports that you're using by 1 or 2, and obviously during the campaign you'll have to. Chain support is really important when it comes to map clear, and you'll see that when you see while you're watching this game footage. You'll see that the Exsanguinate tendrils are firing off in all sorts of weird and wonderful directions, and that's because of chain support, supporting this skill and causing it to project damage well outside of the narrow cone that it usually fires in. However, against bosses, it's best not to use chain support. It is best to use hypothermia support instead, and that's why I said that there are 2 different possible life costs. For each mine. Against bosses, you'll be reserving less life than you are against trash monsters. So you are looking at a setup where it's, as I say, 113 life as your anti-trash spell, and 91 against bosses. You probably won't need to have the full 15 plus mines against trash, but against bosses you often will drop all of them. Now on the passive tree, you can truncate the entire witch area of this tree once you have good clusters. It's an okay area, not necessarily great, and so once you're able to surpass it with cluster jewels, and we'll get into cluster jewels in a sec, you can truncate that area of the tree. But until you got good clusters, Cruel Preparation's fine, all of the life nodes near the witch are good, and there's some critical strike nodes as well. So let's talk gear. Firstly, Cold Iron Point ×2 is your aspirational gear early in endgame. These items can be expensive right at the very start of the league, but they're common enough that you can pretty reasonably acquire them. You can also fire Chance Orbs on every Ezomite Dagger that you pick up, or at least every white Ezomite Dagger that you pick up late in the game if you want to, and so it is something you can source in solo self-found that way. Until you can get yourself Cold Iron points, just use daggers, caster daggers that have either of the following affixes. +1 to the level of all physical skill gems, or +1 to the level of all skill gems. If you can get both of them together, fantastic, but that's a pretty expensive piece of kit and pretty rare to find early on. A +2 to physical daggers weapons, so that's +1 to physical and +1 to all spell skills with other good mods, is your god tier weapon, and that will eclipse Cold Iron Point as far as endgame scaling goes, but you're not likely to get that early. For a safer playstyle, you can drop one of these Cold Iron Points for a shield, and I'm going to leave that decision up to you. For a riskier playstyle and going full glass cannon, drop one of these Cold Iron Points for a Prism Guardian unique shield, and stick Pride and Vitality in the shield. So you'll still be using Vitality, but you'll have it in your shield. You'll have Pride in your shield, and then that will keep you at low life most of the time, and then you pick up the low life node on the passive tree. So talking large cluster jewels, you are going to want 8 mod physical cluster jewels here, ultimately. You want as many of Master the Fundamentals, Exploit Weakness, and Force Multiplier as you can get together. If you can get 2 of those together with otherwise good mods, that's a good cluster jewel. If you can get all 3 of them together, that's great. None of these are individually rare mods, but getting all 3 of them together is unlikely, but it does happen. You will be able to find jewels with all 3 of those mods in a trade league, but they won't be cheap and they won't be available early. So just find 2 of them as soon as you can, and I think that once you've got 2 of them, you can start considering using cluster jewels in your build. For medium cluster jewels, you want 4 or 5 passive mine and trap clusters, and the best mod is Guerrilla Tactics, which is the best one and is very easily rolled. Almost every other notable that's available is great, so just think of your medium cluster jewel goals as Guerrilla Tactics plus 1 other notable plus 2 sort of okay mods in the other slots, and that'll be fine. For boots, you just want good stuff. Move speed, life, resist, and the like. For gloves, good stuff with vulnerability on hit, corruption if possible. It doesn't need to be great explicit mods, just okay ones with the corruption is fine. For your helmet, Exsanguinate's 25% to chain an additional time enchant is fantastic. You really want that if you can get it. Other helmets you might consider are an Elder influenced helmet with 9% increased physical damage taken for enemies, and a Cyrus helm. These are both good. There's other options you can fit in as well. For rings, your best in slot is the unique ring Circle of Guilt, and it needs to be a very specific Circle of Guilt. It needs to have Herald of Purity buff effect and physical damage whilst Herald of Purity is active. For belt, unfortunately, like so many other builds, it's a case of at God tier you have Headhunter, at medium tier you have Replica Headhunter, and then any crafted belt is miles behind. That's just the nature of the game at the moment. For bossing, of course, Headhunter and Replica Headhunter don't do anything, so you'll want to use something else there, but for the belt, you can just go with good stuff, things that add damage, things that add durability to your character. For your amulet, you want to aspire to an Awakener Orbed craft that has a +1 to the level of all physical skill gems, as well as +1 to the level of all strength skill gems, mashed together with an Awakener Orb and with otherwise good mods. Until you can get your hands on that, because that will take you quite some time, early to mid-game, you want one of those 2 mods. Before you can get your hands on that, and you won't be able to do that until you're starting to see item level 82 influence gear, you just want a good stuff amulet. Just the best mods you can get there. This is a spot for life. This is a spot for any missing mods that you might need, like attributes you might need, like maybe you need more strength to use your cast when damage taken setup, and so you can solve problems like that on your amulet early on. Later on, you can get that sorted, or you can get something much better. For your chest piece, your very best possible is probably a Skin of the Loyal with 2 good corruptions. That's not going to be available early in a trade league, and it's not going to be available at all in solo self-found. So you can really use anything here. I'm not going to make any specific suggestions. Any defensive chest is good. Just anything that doesn't impose significant build requirements on you. Now, the next question that comes up is ward versus evasion versus armor versus energy shield items. We really need to see the hard numbers on ward, and so I can't give a definite suggestion here. But because we're using phase acrobatics, if it turns out that ward is not the way to go, which I think it probably won't be, then in that case, you're going to want to go with evasion gear where possible. But I don't think that this is critical. We're not really scaling evasion as a massive defensive layer. We're playing somewhat glass cannony here. It's not as risky as it seems though, because the mine play style is pretty safe. Next up, we have Flasks, and unfortunately, I can't really give any recommendations on Flasks. The whole meta has changed. We don't know what's going to be good. We don't know what the Instilling Orbs and Enkindling Orbs can do, and so for the moment, I'm just going to have to say we don't know. Bottle Faith will still be good, and mana should actually be trivial on this build, and that's because we're spending life rather than mana for our primary skill. It is possible that even at endgame, you'll continue using 2 life flasks, and we'll have to test that out. Oh, one more chest I want to mention is Shadow Stitch as well. So let's just get that mentioned as an option. Shadow Stitch looks a lot better now that there have been nerfs to Cinder Swallow. Jewels. You want to use classic jewels, not Abyss jewels, and some of the good mods are life percent, mind damage, crit multi, global fizz damage, and potentially even resist, because you've got to get resist somewhere, and jewels are one of the lower opportunity cost places to get them. So whatever mix of those you can get, life percent probably being the most important of them, and crit multi being the second best. For golems, we actually probably want to use a stone golem here. I used to love golems. I've gone off them a lot in recent times, and that's because they can cause monsters to do unpredictable things. Particularly, they can cause bosses to be really unpredictable. A boss can have a massive charge up slam attack. You run out of the way, but what you don't realize is that because the boss was fixated on your golem, they actually do the slam on your golem, and it hits you because it hits it. You've run out of where it would have gone if it had been centered on your location, but unfortunately, it's been centered on your golem instead. So that can be a bit sketchy, but that said, I still think you want a stone golem here. We need life recovery. We do get some of it as a Saboteur, but we may need more of it because the amount of damage we're doing to ourselves by casting our mines, reserving a modest amount of our life all the time. For movement skills, this is down to personal taste. I advocate trying Frostblink and trying Flame Dash and working out which you think is better. Remember, Flame Dash was being nerfed in 3.15. Flame Dash was the clear best movement skill before 3.15. I don't like Smoke Mine myself, but by all means, play around with it and see what you can do with it. You might be able to make it work well for you. Don't support your movement skills in general. I don't think they need support. For utility skills, I'm partial to Void Sphere, Decoy Totem in every build. Both of these are used to distract enemies and are very good at it. That can then group up a bunch of enemies together as well, which can then allow you to slaughter them with Exsanguinate Mines, which you can fire off from a long distance. Now, this is my personal opinion, and a lot of people don't like those skills, so just mess around with them and see what you like. I also like manually casting Steel Skin, but this is something that a lot of people prefer to have automated via Cast When Damage Taken. Cast When Damage Taken, a link to Steel Skin, is going to cost a modest chunk of mana in this league, and Cast When Damage Taken, a link to Void Sphere, is probably absolutely off the table now, because Void Sphere has always been an expensive skill, and Cast When Damage Taken is getting a 250% mana multiplier up from 0. For defensive layers, option 1 is that you can go semi-glass cannon. You have blind, you have wind dancer, you have phase acrobatics, so you do have a fair amount of chance for enemies to miss you. And wind dancer means the first hit probably won't kill you, especially if you've got some ward as well. But if you do get focused on in that situation with that glass cannon setup, you will die. The alternative is to stack a lot more sources of dodge percent. So this is chance to dodge enemy spells, chance to dodge enemy attacks. That'll take considerable investment on gear, but will pay off. It'll pay off real dividends if you decide to go down that path. For your bandit, I advocate assisting Alira early on with the potential of respeccing it later. So Alira gives you 3 things. Firstly, there's some mana recovery. We don't really need that all that much, but it's okay. Secondly, you've got 15% resist all, which is a really good thing to have. It takes a bit of pressure off the rest of your gear. You've got to get it somewhere, and this is one of the lower opportunity cost spots to get it. Thirdly, you get a bunch of critical strike multiplier, which is one of the best offensive stats for this build. Because we're not really scaling the damage over time, we're scaling the hit component of Exsanguinate. So that's my thoughts on the bandits, but ultimately, when you've got extremely good gear, you might find that you can do better with 2 passive points. At that point, it just costs you 20 regret orbs and an Onyx amulet to get yourself a respec token for the bandits, at which point you can then help Eramir instead by killing all the bandits. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this build. This is something that has definitely worked in the past and should continue to work. And I feel like it's probably one of the better ways to build mines at the moment. That said, keen to hear your thoughts. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away. Otherwise,